I was halfway through dinner when my daughter-in-law looked straight at me and said, "Barbara, you've never really done anything with your life, have you?"
Home, Grandma.
My son didn't stop her.
I knew you would,
He
son.
just kept eating. I felt something inside me crack, but I stayed quiet. I always did. Then there was a knock at the door. When I
Mrs.
opened
Johnson,
it, a man in
there's been a
full
development.
military uniform
We
stood
found
there,
him.
eyes locked
He's
on
safe,
mine. His
and he's
voice
coming
trembled.
home.
"Ma'am, are you Barbara Collins?" I nodded. He swallowed hard. "You saved my entire squad." And just like that, the room behind me went completely silent. If this story moves you even a little, I'd love for you to like and subscribe. And tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I always read your comments. They mean more than you know. I wish I could tell you that what Jessica said that night was the first time I'd ever been made to feel small in my own home. But it wasn't. It had been building for years, quietly, slowly, like a crack in glass you don't notice until the whole thing finally shatters. After my husband Richard passed away 8 years ago, everything changed. He had been the kind of man who filled a room just by being in it. Not loud, not overbearing, but steady, grounding. When he was alive, no one ever questioned my place, not in this family, not in the world. When he died, it felt like the floor beneath me disappeared. At first, Michael insisted I move in with him and Jessica. He said it was temporary, just until you get back on your feet, Mom, he told me, holding my hand at the funeral like he used to when he was a little boy, afraid of thunderstorms. I believed him, but temporary turned into years, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being his mother and started becoming something else. A responsibility, a quiet inconvenience, a presence people learned to talk around instead of to. Their house was beautiful. Suburban 2-story with a wide kitchen that opened into the living room. Everything was bright, clean, and carefully arranged, Jessica's doing. She liked things a certain way. Organized, controlled. And I didn't quite fit into that system. At first, I tried to help however I could. I cooked dinner most nights. I folded laundry. I picked Emily up from school when Jessica was busy. I made sure the house felt warm, lived in. But those things didn't seem to count. Not really, because I wasn't bringing in money. That was the unspoken rule. And eventually, it became spoken. "You don't have to cook every night," Jessica had said once standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. "It's not like it's your house to manage." I remember the way her words hung in the air. Not loud, not even angry, just sharp. I smiled anyway. I always smiled. "Oh, I just like staying busy," I told her. What I didn't say was that staying busy was the only thing keeping me from feeling like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Michael noticed sometimes. I could tell. He'd give me these looks, quick, guilty glances, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how, or didn't want to deal with what might come after. So he said nothing. And silence can be louder than cruelty. Emily, my granddaughter, used to sit with me in the afternoons. We'd bake cookies or watch old movies. She'd ask questions about when her father was little, about what life was like back then, as she liked to call it. But even that began to change. Kids are observant. They pick up things adults think they're hiding. One afternoon, she asked me, "Grandma, why don't you work?" I paused, my hands still dusted with flour. "I used to," I said gently. She tilted her head. "But what do you do now?" I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "I take care of things here." She thought about that for a moment, then shrugged. "Mom says that's not a real job." I felt that one. Not like a sharp cut, but like something heavier. Something that settled deep and stayed there. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. because somewhere along the line, I had gotten used to not being seen. Days blurred together after that. Morning coffee alone at the kitchen table. Quiet afternoons folding clothes that no one thanked me for folding. Evenings where conversations happened around me, not with me. I became careful with my words, careful with my presence, careful not to take up too much space. Because the truth is, when people treat you like you don't matter long enough, you start to believe them. You shrink, you adjust, you disappear in small, quiet ways. There was a box I kept in the back of my closet, old, worn at the edges. I hadn't opened it in years. Sometimes, late at night when the house was finally still, I'd sit on the edge of my bed and look at it. Just look. I never opened it. Not because I didn't want to, but because opening it meant remembering a version of myself that didn't exist here. A version that didn't fit into this house, into this life, into the way my family saw me now. So I left it closed. And I stayed quiet, because it was easier that way. Easier than trying to explain something no one had ever bothered to ask about. Easier than watching their faces if they didn't believe me. Easier than hoping and being disappointed again. The night Jessica said I had never done anything meaningful wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment everything finally rose to the surface. And maybe a part of me had already known something was about to change. Because the next morning when I heard that knock on the door, something inside me, something I thought had been gone for a very long time, stirred. The night everything broke didn't feel dramatic at first. That's the strange thing about moments that change your life. They rarely announce themselves. They don't come with music or warning signs. They just slip into an ordinary evening and quietly rearrange everything. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were grocery days. I had spent the afternoon clipping coupons at the kitchen table circling small discounts like they were victories. Ground beef on sale. Canned soup 2 for $1. Things that stretched $1 just a little further. Not that anyone ever noticed. Dinner that night was simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The kind of meal I had made hundreds, no thousands of times over the years. Back when my kitchen had been mine. Back when people thanked me. Now it was just expected. We sat around the table like always. Michael at the head, Jessica across from me, Emily beside her swinging her legs slightly under her chair. The television murmured softly in the background from the living room, some news channel no one was really watching. I served everyone first. That was habit too. Jessica barely looked up from her phone as she took her plate. Michael muttered a quiet thanks, but his eyes stayed on the screen of his tablet. Emily gave me a quick smile, but even that felt distracted. I sat down last. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of forks against plates. Chewing, swallowing. Silence stretched thin but familiar. Then Jessica sighed. It was the kind of sigh meant to be heard. I swear, she said, setting her fork down. Everything is getting more expensive lately. Michael nodded without looking up. Yeah, I know. I mean it, Michael, she continued, her voice tightening. Groceries, utilities, insurance, everything. I kept my eyes on my plate. This wasn't new territory. We're fine, he said. For now, she shot back. But we can't keep pretending we don't need to make adjustments. Something in her tone made my chest tighten. Adjustments. That word again. I knew what it meant. Or rather, who it meant. Michael finally looked up. What are you saying? Jessica leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. I'm saying we need to be realistic about our situation. My grip on my fork tightened slightly. We are being realistic, he replied. No, we're avoiding the obvious, she said, and then she looked at me. Not directly at first, just a glance, but then her gaze settled firm and deliberate, and suddenly the air in the room shifted. Emily stopped swinging her legs. Michael's shoulders stiffened. I felt it before she even spoke. That we're supporting 3 people on 2 incomes, Jessica said slowly, and one of them isn't contributing anything. There it was, laid out plainly. No more hints. No more polite avoidance. Just truth, at least her version of it. I felt my face grow warm, but I didn't look up. I had learned that looking up made it worse. Michael cleared his throat. Jess. I'm not trying to be mean, she cut in quickly, though her tone didn't soften. I'm just being honest. This situation isn't sustainable. I stared at my plate, the food suddenly tasteless. I help, I said quietly. The words came out softer than I intended, almost like I was asking permission for them to exist. Jessica let out a small laugh. Not loud, but sharp, with what exactly she asked. That one landed. Hard. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Because how do you explain invisible work to someone who has already decided it doesn't matter? I cook, I said finally. I clean. I take care of things around the house. Jessica tilted her head slightly, her expression almost pitying. Barbara, she said, her voice dripping with something that felt dangerously close to condescension. That's not the same as contributing. I felt something inside me twist. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Jess, that's enough. No, it's not enough, she insisted. We've been avoiding this conversation for too long. She turned back to me fully now. Direct, unapologetic. You've been living here for years, she said, and I'm sorry, but you've never really done anything meaningful to support yourself. Or us. The words hit the same way they had in the hook, but this time, they didn't just shock me. They sank in. Deep. Because it wasn't just what she said. It was the fact that no one stopped her. Not immediately. Not firmly. Not the way Richard would have. I waited. Just a second. Maybe 2. For Michael to say something. To correct her. To defend me. But he didn't. He just sat there staring at his plate, his jaw tight, his silence louder than anything Jessica had said. And that silence. That was the moment something inside me truly broke. Emily spoke up, then her small voice cutting through the tension. Mom, she said, frowning slightly. Grandma makes dinner every night. Jessica didn't even look at her. That's not a job, sweetheart. Emily's brow furrowed. But it's not, Jessica repeated sharper this time. Emily went quiet. I looked at her, my heart aching in a way I couldn't quite explain. Because I didn't want her learning this. This way of measuring people. This way of deciding who mattered. I never said I was a burden, I whispered. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Jessica sighed again, louder this time. No one used that word, she said. But if the shoe fits, Michael finally looked up. Jess, he said more firmly this time, stop. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. I'm just saying what everyone is thinking, she said. At some point, we have to consider other options. Other options? I knew exactly what that meant. Assisted living, a smaller place, somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't here. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer. I placed my fork down carefully. I see, I said. My voice was steady, calmer than I felt, and that seemed to surprise her more than anything. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Michael exhaled slowly, rubbing his face. We'll talk about this later, he muttered. But later never comes the way people think it will. Sometimes later shows up at your door the very next morning, wearing a military uniform, calling you by name, and reminding everyone in the room exactly who you used to be, and maybe who you still are. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because I couldn't sleep. Jessica's words from the night before lingered in the corners of my mind, replaying themselves in quiet loops. You've never really done anything meaningful. It was strange how a sentence could echo like that, how it could settle into your chest and make itself at home. I sat at the edge of the bed for a while, staring at my hands. These hands had raised a child, cooked thousands of meals, held a husband as he took his last breath, and yet somehow they were now seen as empty. I stood slowly and made my way to the kitchen. The house was still. No footsteps upstairs, no coffee machine humming, no television murmuring, just silence. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, wrapping both hands around the mug, letting the warmth sink into my fingers. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in a long time. Crying required a kind of release, and somewhere along the way, I had learned how to hold everything in. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard it. A knock. Firm. Clear. Not the kind of knock a neighbor gives. Not hesitant. Not casual. This one had purpose. I frowned slightly, setting my cup down. We weren't expecting anyone. Jessica hated unannounced visitors. I stood and walked toward the front door, my heartbeat picking up just a little. Not out of fear, but something else I couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or instinct. When I opened the door, the morning light spilled in behind the figure standing on the porch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a formal military uniform pressed precise, decorated with medals that caught the light just enough to draw the eye. For a moment, I just stared, because something about him felt familiar. Not his face exactly, but the way he carried himself. Steady, controlled. Like a man who had learned how to stand firm in chaos. His eyes met mine, sharp at first, then softening almost immediately. He said, his voice respectful but slightly strained. Are you Barbara Collins? My name sounded different coming from him. Heavier, important. I nodded slowly. Yes, I am. He exhaled like he had been holding his breath. And then something unexpected happened. His composure cracked. Not completely, but enough for me to see it. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened just slightly. You probably don't remember me, he said, but I've been looking for you for a long time. My heart skipped. Looking for me? I'm sorry, I said gently. I don't. You saved my squad, he said. The words landed between us, and for a second, I couldn't breathe, because I did remember. Not everything, but enough. A flicker of something long buried stirred in my chest. Before I could respond, I heard footsteps behind me. Barbara. Who is it? Jessica's voice called out, already edged with irritation. She stepped into the hallway, Michael just behind her, still half asleep, rubbing his eyes. They both froze when they saw him. The uniform, the posture, the presence. It filled the doorway in a way that demanded attention. Jessica straightened slightly, her expression shifting instantly from annoyance to something more composed. Yes, she said, stepping forward. Can we help you? The soldier's eyes flicked to her briefly, then back to me. I'm here for her, he said simply. Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten again. Michael stepped closer. "What's going on?" The man reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn creased from being opened and closed many times. "I kept this," he said, holding it carefully. "All these years." He handed it to me. My hands trembled slightly as I took it. I recognized the paper immediately, not because of what it said, but because of the way it felt. The texture, the age, the memory attached to it. I unfolded it slowly, and there it was. My handwriting, a list, names, medical notes, instructions, details that had once meant the difference between life and death. I felt the room shift around me. Jessica leaned closer, trying to see. "What is that?" I didn't answer. Because suddenly I wasn't in that hallway anymore. I was somewhere else, a long time ago, where things were louder, faster, more dangerous, where decisions mattered in ways people like Jessica would never fully understand. "You were stationed at Fort Ridge Medical Unit." The soldier said, his voice quieter now, more controlled. "About 12 years ago." 12 years? I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said. Michael frowned. "Mom, what is he talking about?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy he used to be. The one who used to look at me like I knew everything, like I was someone worth listening to. "I used to be a trauma nurse," I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to someone else. Jessica blinked. "You what? I worked with military units?" I continued slowly. "Emergency response, field support. When injured soldiers were brought in, we stabilized them before transfer." The soldier nodded. "She doesn't even know the full extent of it," he said quietly. "You weren't just a nurse, ma'am." I shook my head slightly. I was doing my job. "No," he said, firmer now. "You were saving lives." Silence filled the space again, but this time it was different. Jessica's expression shifted, confusion mixing with something else, something uncomfortable. "You treated us after an ambush," the soldier continued. "We were hit hard. Communications were down. Evacuation delayed." His voice tightened slightly. "We lost 2 men before we got to you." I felt my throat close. I remembered that day, the chaos, the blood, the pressure of knowing every second mattered. "You worked on us for hours," he said. "You didn't stop. Not once." I looked down at the paper in my hands. The list, their names. "I just did what I could," I whispered. He shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said. "You did what no one else could." Jessica let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Okay, but she started, that was years ago, right?" Her tone carried that same edge again. Dismissive, minimizing, like the past didn't count, like it didn't matter. The soldier's eyes snapped to her, and for the first time, there was something hard in them. "Yes," he said slowly. "Years ago." He stepped forward slightly, his presence suddenly sharper. "But standing here today because of what she did." The weight of that statement settled heavily in the room. Michael didn't speak. He just stared at me, and I could see it in his eyes. Confusion, shock, and something else, something like realization. The soldier looked back at me. "I've spent years trying to find you," he said, "because I needed to say this face to face." His voice softened. "You didn't just save me." He paused. "You saved all of us." And in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. No one moved for a few seconds after he said it. Not me, not Michael, not even Jessica. It was as if the entire room had been paused, like someone had pressed a button and frozen everything in place. You saved all of us. Those words echoed in my mind louder than anything Jessica had said the night before, because they weren't meant to cut. They were meant to honor. And I realized, standing there in my own son's hallway, I hadn't heard words like that in a very long time. Jessica was the first to recover. She let out a small, uneasy laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Well, that's very kind of you to say, she said, her tone polite, but clearly strained. But I'm sure it wasn't just her, right? I mean, there must have been a whole team. The soldier didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on me. There was a team, he said calmly. But she's the reason we made it through that night. I swallowed. My hands tightened slightly around the paper. I wasn't alone, I insisted softly. There were doctors? Other nurses? Yes, he said. And when things got overwhelmed, when we started losing people. He paused, his jaw tightening. You took over. That didn't sound right, or at least it didn't sound like something I would have said about myself. I just followed protocol, I replied. He shook his head again, more firmly this time. No, ma'am. Protocol ended when the power went out. That memory hit me like a sudden gust of cold air. The lights flickering, the alarms failing, the sound of generators trying and struggling to keep up, and the wounded, too many of them, too fast. I closed my eyes for just a moment. You kept working in the dark, he continued. Flashlights, emergency lamps. Whatever we could find. Michael shifted beside Jessica. Mom, he said slowly, you never told me any of this. I opened my eyes and looked at him. There was no accusation in his voice, just confusion, maybe even a little disbelief. I didn't think it mattered, I said quietly. Jessica let out another laugh, but this one was sharper. Well, it would have been nice to know you had some kind of career before all this, she said. There it was again. That tone, that need to reduce everything to something smaller. The soldier finally turned to her, and this time he didn't hide the edge in his voice. She didn't just have a career, he said. She had a responsibility most people wouldn't survive. Jessica blinked, taken aback. I didn't mean... You said she's never done anything meaningful, he cut in, not raising his voice. But not softening it either. The room went still again. Jessica glanced at Michael as if expecting him to step in. But he didn't. He was looking at me, really looking, and I could see something shifting behind his eyes. Something uncomfortable, something regretful. I didn't know, he said almost to himself. That's because she never talks about it, the soldier replied. He turned back to me. Why is that? He asked gently. I hesitated. Because the answer wasn't simple. Because it wasn't just one reason. It was a long time ago, I said finally. And after your father passed. I glanced at Michael. Everything just changed. The soldier studied my face for a moment, as if trying to understand something deeper than my words. Then he nodded slowly. I understand that, he said. But what you did didn't stop mattering just because time passed. Jessica crossed her arms again. Look, I'm sure it was impressive, she said clearly, trying to regain control of the conversation. But that doesn't really change our current situation, does it? There it was. Back to money. Back to contribution. Back to the idea that value only exists if it can be measured in dollars. I felt that familiar shrinking sensation in my chest. The old instinct to stay quiet, to step back, to let it pass. But before I could say anything, The soldier spoke again. It changes everything, he said. Jessica frowned. How? He took a breath, then reached into his jacket. This time, he pulled out something else. A small, neatly folded envelope, official-looking. He held it carefully like it mattered. Because I didn't come here just to say thank you, he said. My heart skipped. Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly. Then why are you here? He looked at me again, and something in his expression softened. Because there's something you deserve to know. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not fear, not exactly, more like anticipation, the kind that builds slowly, quietly, until it becomes impossible to ignore. He handed me the envelope. This was authorized last year, he explained. But we couldn't locate you. Records were incomplete, addresses outdated. I took it slowly. What is it? I asked. He smiled faintly. It's recognition, he said. Jessica leaned forward slightly, curiosity overtaking her irritation. Recognition for what? The soldier didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on me. For actions above and beyond your duty, he said. For saving multiple lives under extreme conditions. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Formal, stamped, official. I scanned the first few lines, and then I froze. Because it wasn't just a thank you. It was something much bigger. My breath caught. What is it? Michael asked, stepping closer. I looked up at him slowly. I was nominated, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For what he asked. I swallowed. For a civilian commendation award, I said. From the Department of Defense. The words felt surreal, like I was reading someone else's life. Jessica's eyes widened slightly. That's a big deal, right? She asked, looking between me and the soldier. He nodded. It's one of the highest honors a civilian can receive for supporting military operations, he said. Silence fell again, but this time, it was heavy in a different way. Not tense, not sharp, just full. Full of something that hadn't been there before. Respect. Michael ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head slightly. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? He asked again. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't think you wanted to hear it, I said honestly. That one landed hard. He flinched slightly, like the truth had caught him off guard. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Well, I mean, we didn't know, she said, her voice quieter now. The soldier folded his arms. Now you do. And something about the way he said it made it clear. That wasn't just information. That was accountability. I looked down at the letter again, at the words, at the recognition I had never expected. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something inside me begin to rise. Not anger, not pride, something steadier, something stronger, something that had been buried for years and was finally coming back. The letter felt heavier the longer I held it, not physically, but emotionally. Like every word inside it carried the weight of a life I had quietly buried and was now being forced to face ag ain. I didn't even know this existed, but emotionally, like every word inside it carried the weight of a life I had quietly buried and was now being forced to face again. I didn't even know this existed, I said softly, still staring at the page. That's because you never followed up, the soldier replied gently. You disappeared from the system after that year. I nodded slowly. I left, I said, after my husband got sick. Then he passed, and I paused. Everything else just faded. Michael looked at me like he was seeing pieces of my life rearrange themselves in real time. You just stopped? He asked. I met his eyes. Yes, I said simply. I stopped being that person? Jessica shifted beside him, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were going. But you didn't have to stay stopped, she said almost defensively. People reinvent themselves all the time. I almost smiled at that, because she said it like it was easy, like life was a series of choices neatly laid out in front of you. Sometimes I said you don't even realize you've stopped until someone reminds you who you used to be. Like life was a series of choices neatly laid out in front of you. Sometimes I said you don't even realize you've stopped until someone reminds you who you used to be. The soldier nodded. That's why I'm here, he said. He took a step closer, his tone more personal now. Mom Barbara, he said carefully, that night didn't just change us. It changed you too. I exhaled slowly. It changed all of us, I corrected. He hesitated for a moment, then said something that made the air in the room shift again. There's more, he said. Jessica sighed quietly, like she was already tired of hearing about things that didn't directly benefit her. What else could there possibly be? She muttered under her breath. The soldier ignored her. This commendation, he continued nodding toward the letter in my hands, comes with a formal ceremony. Michael blinked. A ceremony? Yes, he said. In Washington. That caught Jessica's attention immediately. Washington, D.C., she asked, suddenly alert. Yes. Her posture straightened. And what exactly happens at this ceremony? She asked. The soldier's expression remained neutral. You would be formally recognized, he said to me. Your actions would be read publicly. There would be officials present, military leadership. Jessica's eyes flickered. And media? She asked. I noticed that. Of course I did. The shift in her priorities was subtle, but not invisible. Possibly, he said. Depending on the event. She nodded slowly, clearly calculating something. Well, that sounds important, she said, her tone suddenly softer. You should definitely go. I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. The difference between interest and respect. She wasn't proud of me. She was interested in what this could become. Michael, on the other hand, looked genuinely overwhelmed. I don't even know what to say, he admitted. This is huge. I folded the letter carefully. It doesn't feel huge, I said. They both looked at me. It feels late. Michael, on the other hand, looked genuinely overwhelmed. I don't even know what to say, he admitted. This is huge. I folded the letter carefully. It doesn't feel huge, I said. They both looked at me. It feels late, I added. The soldier's brow furrowed slightly. Late, he repeated. Yes, I said, like something that should have been acknowledged years ago but wasn't. He nodded slowly. I understand that, he said, but sometimes recognition takes time. Jessica crossed her arms again, though this time it wasn't defensive. It was thoughtful. So, when is this ceremony? She asked. In about 6 weeks, he replied. Her eyes lit up slightly. That's enough time to prepare, she said. Prepare. For what? Outfits, photos, appearances. I felt something tighten in my chest again. Not the shrinking feeling from before. something different, something sharper. "I'm not sure I'm going," I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Silence fell instantly. What Michael asked. Jessica stared at me like I had just said something completely absurd. "You're not going," she repeated. I shook my head slightly. "I don't know if that's who I am anymore," I said. The soldier's expression changed. Not disappointment, something deeper. Concern. "Barbara," he said carefully with respect, "that is who you are." I met his gaze. "Is it?" I asked. "Absolutely," he said without hesitation. "You don't stop being the person who saved lives just because you haven't done it recently." Jessica let out a short, frustrated breath. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Do you know how many people would kill for an opportunity like that?" I turned to her slowly. "Yes," I said, "and that's exactly why I'm not sure I want it." She frowned. "That doesn't make any sense." "It does?" I replied calmly, "because I didn't do what I did for recognition." The soldier nodded slightly. "I know that," he said. "That's why you deserve it." That landed differently, because it wasn't about the award. It was about something else, something I hadn't fully understood yet. Michael stepped closer to me. "Mom, this isn't just about you," he said gently. "This is about what you did, about the people you helped." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Respect. Real respect. And it stirred something in me. Something fragile. Something hopeful. Jessica sighed again, clearly losing patience. "Well, whether you feel like it or not, this is a big deal," she said. "And honestly, it could open doors." There it was again. Doors. Opportunities. Value measured in outcomes. The soldier's eyes hardened slightly. "This isn't about doors," he said. "It's about honor." Jessica rolled her eyes slightly but didn't argue. I looked down at the letter again, at the words, at the version of myself that existed in them. And I realized something. I hadn't just walked away from that life. I had hidden from it, because it reminded me of everything I had lost. My husband, my purpose, my identity. But now, standing in that hallway with my son watching me, with a soldier who owed his life to something I had once done, I felt something shift. A quiet question rising inside me. What if I didn't have to stay hidden anymore? What would happen if I said no? I asked softly. The soldier didn't hesitate. "Then we would respect your decision," he said. "But I would ask you one thing." "What's that?" He looked at me steadily. "Don't say no, because someone made you feel like you don't matter." The room went silent again. Because that wasn't just a statement, that was the truth. The kind of truth that doesn't shout, but settles deep and refuses to be ignored. I took a slow breath, and for the first time since he arrived, I wasn't thinking about Jessica, or Michael, or expectations. I was thinking about myself, and whether I was finally ready to stop believing the story I had been told. That question stayed with me long after the soldier left. Don't say no because someone made you feel like you don't matter. It echoed in my mind as I stood alone in the small guest room that night, staring at the letter again. The house was quiet. Too quiet. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that settles after something has shifted, after something important has been revealed, even if no one has fully processed it yet. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, holding the letter in both hands. My name, printed clearly, formally, Barbara Collins. It looked unfamiliar in that context, like it belonged to someone else, someone stronger, someone braver, someone who didn't hesitate. And yet, it was me, or at least it had been. A soft knock came at the door. I didn't answer right away. "Mom." Michael's voice came through quieter than usual. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Yes." The door opened slowly. He stepped in, closing it gently behind him. For a moment, he just stood there like he wasn't sure how to begin. That alone told me something. Michael had never struggled to speak before. Not when it came to me. Not when it came to telling me what I should be doing. But this time, he looked uncertain. "I've been thinking," he said finally. I gave a small nod. "So have I." He took a few steps closer, then sat down in the chair across from me. "Not too close, but not distant either. I feel like I don't know you," he said. The honesty of it didn't hurt as much as I expected. Maybe because it was true. "You know parts of me," I said gently. "Just not the parts that came before you." He shook his head slightly. "No. I think I stopped trying to know you a long time ago." That landed deeper. Because it wasn't just a confession. It was an admission. Of neglect. Of distance. Of something that had quietly grown between us over the years. "I got used to seeing you one way," he continued, "and I never questioned it." I looked down at the letter again. "That's what happens when people stop asking questions," I said. He let out a slow breath. "Sorry," he said. Simple, direct, but heavy. Because it wasn't just for tonight. It was for years. For every dismissive comment. For every time he let Jessica speak over me. For every moment he chose convenience over connection. I looked at him carefully. "Why now?" I asked. He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Why apologize now?" I clarified. "What changed?" He didn't answer right away, and that told me he was thinking honestly, not just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. "That guy," he said finally. "The soldier." I waited. "He looked at you like you were important," Michael continued. "Like you mattered in a way I've never really seen before." I nodded slowly. "And that surprised you?" I said. "Yes." He admitted. There it was. The truth. Not comfortable, but real. "I think I didn't realize how much I had reduced you," he said quietly. Reduced. That was the word. Not ignored, not forgotten. Reduced. Made smaller. Easier to manage. Easier to dismiss. Easier to overlook. I felt something shift inside me again. Not anger. Not resentment. Something clearer. Understanding. Something clearer. Understanding. "That's what people do when they don't see the full picture," I said. He nodded. "But I should have wanted to see it," he said. "Yes," I agreed. Silence filled the room again. Beauty. This time it wasn't heavy. It was. "That's what people do when they don't see the full picture," I said. He nodded. "But I should have wanted to see it," he said. "Yes." I agreed. Silence filled the room again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was reflective. Michael leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." Why didn't you ever tell me about what you did? He asked. I smiled faintly. I think part of me believed it didn't matter anymore, I said. He shook his head immediately. It matters. Why didn't you ever tell me about what you did? He asked. I smiled faintly. I think part of me believed it didn't matter anymore, I said. He shook his head immediately. It matters, he said. Now it does, I replied gently. He paused, then asked the question I knew was coming. Are you going to the ceremony? I looked at the letter again, at the invitation, at the life it represented. I don't know yet, I said honestly. He nodded slowly. I think you should, he said. I looked at him. Why? He hesitated, then said something I didn't expect. Because I think you need to see yourself the way that soldier sees you, he said. That caught me off guard, because it wasn't about pride or recognition. It was about perspective, about reclaiming something I had lost. Maybe, I said quietly. There was another knock at the door, this one sharper. Without waiting, the door opened. Jessica stepped in. Of course she did. She never waited for permission. I figured you two would be in here, she said, her tone light but her eyes scanning the room carefully. Assessing, measuring. She looked at the letter in my hands, still reading that she asked. I folded it slowly and set it beside me. Yes. She nodded. Well, I've been thinking she said crossing her arms. I almost smiled. Of course she had. And Michael asked. Jessica took a small breath, like she was about to present something important. I think we should all go, she said. I blinked. All, I repeated. Yes, she said, to the ceremony. The room went quiet again. Not shocked, just tense. That's not necessary, I said. It's not about necessary, she replied quickly. It's about support. Support. The word sounded right, but something about the way she said it felt off, calculated. Michael glanced at her. Jessica? He started, but she cut him off. No, hear me out, she said. This is a big moment. For the family. There it was. For the family. Not for me. For the image. For the story. For what it could represent. I don't need a crowd, I said calmly. It wouldn't be a crowd, she insisted. Just us. I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't feel intimidated or diminished. I felt clear. I'll decide what I need, I said. Her expression shifted slightly. Not anger, not yet, but surprise, because that wasn't the answer she expected. Michael sat up straighter. Mom's right, he said. This is her decision. Jessica pressed her lips together, then forced a small smile. Of course, she said. I just thought it would be nice. Nice. Everything was always framed as nice, even when it wasn't, even when it was self-serving. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied, not with the uncertainty, not with the lack of control. All right, she said. Well, just don't wait too long. These things usually require planning. Planning, schedules, appearances. I watched her as she turned to leave, and for the first time, I saw her not as someone above me, not as someone to impress, but simply as someone who needed control. The door closed behind her. Michael let out a quiet breath. She's just trying to help, he said. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. She's trying to be involved. He frowned. That's different. Yes, I said, because help comes from understanding, and involvement often comes from interest, and I was starting to see the difference very clearly. Michael didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. I'll support whatever you decide, he said. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I believed him. Thank you, I said. He stood up, hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. Awkwardly, he placed a hand on my shoulder. A small gesture, but meaningful. Then he left, and I was alone again. I picked up the letter one more time, ran my fingers over my name. Barbara Collins. Maybe it was time to decide who that really was. The next morning felt different. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else might notice, but inside me, something had shifted. For years, I had woken up with the same quiet heaviness, a routine that didn't ask anything from me, and a life that didn't expect much either. But that morning, I woke up with a question. Who am I now? Not who I used to be. Not who they thought I was, but who I actually was standing in that moment. I sat up slowly, letting the silence settle around me. Then I reached for the letter again. I must have read it 10 times already. But this time, I wasn't reading it for information. I was reading it for meaning. Each sentence painted a picture of a version of me that had acted without hesitation. A woman who didn't shrink. A woman who stepped forward when others stepped back. I traced one line with my finger. Her decisive actions prevented multiple casualties under hostile conditions. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I let myself remember. Not the sanitized version, not the distant memory I had pushed away, but the real one, the noise, the urgency, the fear that had been there but never stopped me. I could still hear the shouting, still feel the pressure of making a decision that had no guarantee of survival. And yet, I had acted because someone needed to. A knock at the door pulled me back. Barbara. Still feel the pressure of making a decision that had no guarantee of survival, and yet I had acted because someone needed to. A knock at the door pulled me back. Barbara Jessica's voice. I opened my eyes slowly. Yes, breakfast is ready, she said. I hesitated, then answered, I'll be down in a minute. Her footsteps faded. I looked at the letter one more time, then carefully folded it and placed it inside my bag. Not on the nightstand, not left behind. With me, that felt important. When I walked into the kitchen, Michael was already seated at the table. Jessica stood by the counter arranging plates. Everything looked normal, too normal. As if yesterday hadn't happened, as if nothing had shifted. But I could feel it, in the way Michael glanced at me when I entered, in the way Jessica paused slightly before speaking. Good morning, she said, her tone polite, almost rehearsed. Good morning, I replied. I sat down across from Michael. He gave me a small smile, not forced, not performative, just real. Sleep okay? He asked. I did, I said. Jessica set a plate in front of me. Eggs, toast, coffee. She placed it carefully like she was trying to do something right. I thought we could talk today, she said, sitting down. There it was. Of course, about the ceremony, she added. I took a sip of coffee before answering. I'm still thinking, I said. She nodded quickly. Of course, but there are some practical things we should consider. Practical. Planning again. Schedules. Logistics. Appearances. Michael glanced at her. Maybe we should give Mom some space, he said. Jessica smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm not pressuring, she said. I'm just helping her think through it. I set my cup down. I appreciate that I said calmly, but I need to decide this for myself. She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. All right, but I could tell she wasn't done. After breakfast, Michael left for work. Jessica stayed behind. I could hear her moving around the house, talking on the phone in low tones. At first I didn't pay attention, but then I heard something that made me stop. Yes, Washington, she said quietly. It's a formal military recognition. I froze. Her voice lowered further. No, she hasn't confirmed yet, but I'm sure she will. A pause, then a soft laugh. It's a big deal. There might even be press coverage. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with clarity. I stepped closer to the hallway, just enough to hear. I'll keep you updated, she said. It could be. It's a big deal. There might even be press coverage. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with clarity. I stepped closer to the hallway, just enough to hear. I'll keep you updated, she said. It could be useful. Useful. There it was. Not pride, not respect, not admiration. Utility. I stepped back before she could notice me, and for a moment, I just stood there, letting the reality settle. This wasn't about me for her. It never had been. It was about what my story could do for her, what it could become, what it could bring. I walked back to the guest room slowly, closed the door, and sat down. For years, I had tolerated small dismissals, subtle disrespect, quiet erasure, because I told myself it wasn't worth the conflict, because I believed keeping peace mattered more than asserting myself. But now, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like absence, like I had disappeared from my own life. I reached for my phone. It had been sitting untouched for most of the week. I scrolled through my contacts, old names, old connections, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Then I stopped. On one name, Dr. Evelyn Harris, my old supervisor, the one who had written the initial report after that night, the one who had tried to follow up with me before I walked away. My finger hovered over the screen. Then I pressed call. It rang longer than I expected. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, hello, her voice, older, but unmistakable. I swallowed. Dr. Harris, it's Barbara. Barbara Collins. Silence. Then, oh my goodness, she said. Barbara? A warmth spread through me. Yes. I thought you disappeared, she said. I did, I admitted. A pause. Then she softened. Well, I'm glad you found your way back. Back. That word hit differently. I received a letter, I said, about a commendation. Yes, she said immediately. It's long overdue. You knew I asked. I pushed for it, she replied. That surprised me. You did, of course, she said. What you did that night, Barbara, we never forgot. My throat tightened. Because I had. Or at least, I had tried to. I didn't follow up. I said. I know, she said, gently. But that doesn't erase what happened. I closed my eyes briefly. There's a ceremony, I said. In Washington, she confirmed. I'm not sure I should go. There was a pause. Not hesitation, consideration. Then, Barbara. She said this isn't about whether you should go. I waited. It's about whether you're ready to be seen again. Seen. Not praised, not rewarded. Seen. And suddenly, everything became clearer. This wasn't about the past. It was about the present. About whether I was willing to step back into a version of myself I had abandoned. I don't know if I am, I admitted. That's okay, she said. But don't let fear make that decision for you. Fear, not doubt, not humility. Fear. She was right. I wasn't questioning my worth. I was avoiding it, avoiding the responsibility of acknowledging it. We spoke for a few more minutes about the past, about the program, about the people I had helped. When I hung up, I sat very still, because something inside me had finally settled. Not the answer, but the direction. I stood up slowly, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself. Really looked. Not as someone small, not as someone overlooked, but as someone who had lived, who had acted, who had mattered. And maybe still did. Downstairs, I could hear Jessica moving again. Still planning, still talking, still building something around a story that wasn't hers. I took a slow breath. And for the first time, I knew something's for certain. This decision would not be made for her, or for Michael, or for anyone else. It would be mine, and whatever I chose, it would finally reflect the truth. Not the version of me they had grown used to, but the one I was ready to become again. That afternoon, I made my decision. Not loudly, not dramatically. There was no announcement, no grand declaration. Just a quiet certainty that settled in my chest, like something that had finally found its place. I was going. But not for the reasons anyone expected. Not for recognition. Not for applause. And certainly not for Jessica. I was going because I needed to stand in a room where my past and present could finally meet. Because I needed to see with my own eyes whether the woman described in that letter still existed inside me, and maybe to prove that she never really left. I found Jessica in the living room, her phone pressed to her ear, her tone bright and polished. Yes, I'll send you the details, she was saying. It's shaping up to be something very meaningful. I stepped into the doorway. She glanced at me, then quickly turned her back slightly, lowering her voice. I'll call you back, she said, ending the call. A smile appeared instantly when she faced me again. Barbara. She glanced at me, then quickly turned her back slightly, lowering her voice. I'll call you back, she said, ending the call. A smile appeared ending the call. A smile appeared instantly when she faced me again. Barbara, she said. I was just... am going, I said. The words were simple, but they landed heavily. Her eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second. Then her smile grew. That's wonderful, Nitley, when she faced me again. Barbara, she said. I'm going, I said. The words were simple, but they landed heavily. Her eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second. Then her smile grew. That's wonderful, she said quickly. I knew you would. Of course she did. Or at least she believed she did. I'm going alone, I added. The smile faltered, only slightly, but I saw it. Oh, she said. Well, we can talk about that. I think it would really mean a lot if I'm going alone. I repeated, my voice calm, steady. Not defensive, not aggressive, just final. She studied me for a moment, trying to read the space between my words, trying to find a way in. Well, she said slowly, if that's what you want. It wasn't agreement. It was adjustment. She was recalculating. I could see it. Thank you for understanding, I said. She nodded, but her eyes had already shifted. Planning again, always planning. I turned and walked away before she could say anything else. That evening, Michael came home later than usual. When he walked into the kitchen, I was sitting at the table, a small suitcase beside me. He stopped. Mom, he said, what's going on? I'm leaving tomorrow, I said. His brows furrowed. Tomorrow? Yes. To Washington, he asked. I nodded. So soon, there's a flight in the morning, I said. It makes sense. He stepped closer, glancing at the suitcase, then back at me. I thought we'd have more time to talk about this, he said. I gave a small, understanding smile. I've spent enough time thinking, I replied. He exhaled slowly. Are you sure you want to go alone? He asked. There was no judgment in his tone, just concern. I am, I said. He nodded. I get that, he said quietly, and I believed him. Jessica appeared in the doorway behind him. Of course she did. I was just telling Michael, she said, her voice light but controlled. Barbara's heading to Washington. I can hear that Jessica appeared in the doorway behind him. Of course she did. I was just telling Michael, she said, her voice light but controlled. Barbara's heading to Washington. I can hear that he replied, not unkindly. She crossed her arms, gently leaning against the frame. Well, if you change your mind, she said to me, we can make arrangements quickly. I won't, I said. Another small pause, another recalculation. All right, she said. Dinner that night was quieter, not tense, not hostile, just careful. Like everyone was aware that something had shifted permanently, even if they didn't know what it meant yet. After we ate, Michael helped me carry my suitcase upstairs. He set it down by the bed, then stood there for a moment. I'm proud of you, he said. The words surprised me, because they weren't tied to anything specific. Not the ceremony, not the past. Just me. Thank you, I said softly. He nodded, then hesitated. I wish I had said that sooner, he added. I looked at him, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. I'm saying it now, he continued, and I mean it. I know, I said. That seemed to matter to him. He gave a small, relieved smile. Call me when you get there, he said. I will. He left a few minutes later. Jessica didn't come up, didn't knock, didn't offer any last-minute suggestions or plans, and that somehow told me more than anything she could have said. The next morning, the house was still asleep when I left. I paused at the front door for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I was aware of how many times I had walked out of that house feeling small, unnoticed, unimportant. This time, it was different. I stepped outside, closed the door quietly behind me, and took a deep breath. The air felt lighter. The airport was busy as always, people moving with purpose, families saying goodbye, business travelers glued to their phones. I moved through it all quietly, my small suitcase rolling behind me. No one noticed me, and for once, that didn't feel like invisibility. It felt like freedom. On the plane, I took a window seat. As it lifted off the ground, I looked down at the shrinking city below. The roads, the houses, the life I had been living. It looked so small from above, so contained, so distant. I leaned back and closed my eyes. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. Not fear. Not hesitation. Anticipation. When I landed in Washington, D.C., the air felt different. Heavier somehow. Full of history. Full of stories that had been told and others that hadn't. I stepped out of the airport, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it in. This city. This moment. It wasn't something I had planned. It wasn't something I had worked toward. And yet, it felt like I had been moving toward it for years. I took a taxi to the hotel listed in the letter. When I gave the driver the address, he nodded immediately. Big event. And yet, it felt like I had been moving toward it for years. I took a taxi to the hotel listed in the letter. When I gave the driver the address, he nodded immediately. Big event? He asked casually. I think so, I said. He chuckled. Lots of those around here. I smiled faintly. Yes, I said. I suppose there are. When we arrived, the hotel lobby was already busy. Uniforms, officials, people speaking in low, serious tones. I felt a flicker of something in my chest. Nerves. But they didn't overwhelm me. They reminded me. I checked in at the front desk. The woman behind the counter looked at my name, then at me. Ms. Collins, she said. Yes. Her expression shifted slightly. Respect. Recognition. We've been expecting you, she said. That phrase, it stayed with me. We've been expecting you. Not waiting, not wondering, expecting. Like I belonged there. Like my presence wasn't a surprise. I took my room key and made my way upstairs. When I stepped into the room, I set my bag down slowly, then walked to the window. The city stretched out in front of me, wide, unfolding, full of movement. I placed my hand lightly against the glass, and for a moment, I let everything catch up with me. The past, the silence, the years of being unseen. And now, this. A knock at the door startled me. I turned my heart, picking up slightly. It'll be right there, I called. When I opened the door, I froze. Because standing there, in full uniform, was the soldier. The same one who had come to my house. But now, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two other men, also in uniform, also watching me with a kind of quiet respect. Ma'am, he said, his voice steady but warm. We were hoping to catch you before tomorrow. I felt my breath catch slightly. You found me, I said. He smiled. We made sure we did. Something in his tone, something deeper than formality. You're not just here for the ceremony, I said slowly. He exchanged a glance with the others, then looked back at me. No, ma'am, he said. There was a pause, heavy, meaningful. We're here because there's something you need to know, he added. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something else, something that felt like the edge of a truth I hadn't yet seen. What is it? I asked. He took a small step forward, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just gratitude, not just respect. Something deeper, something unresolved. The story you were told, he said carefully, about what happened that night. He hesitated, and suddenly, I knew. Or at least I felt it. It's not the whole truth. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The hallway outside my hotel room felt suddenly smaller, tighter, as if the walls had shifted closer without warning. The whole truth I repeated quietly. The soldier Daniel nodded. Yes, ma'am. Behind him, the two other men stood in respectful silence, their presence steady but heavy, like witnesses to something that had waited too long to be said. I stepped back. Please, come in. They entered carefully, almost cautiously, as if they were aware they were stepping into something more than just a room. I closed the door behind them. No one sat at first. No one rushed. The air was thick with something unspoken. Finally, I gestured toward the chairs. Sit, I said. They did. Daniel remained standing for a second longer before taking a seat across from me. Up close, I could see it more clearly now. Not just gratitude in his eyes. Burden. You said the story isn't complete. I said, my voice steady, but quieter than I intended. Then tell me what's missing. He took a slow breath. You were told that you helped coordinate evacuation efforts, he began. I nodded. That you made critical decisions under pressure, he continued. Yes, that your actions prevented casualties. I held his gaze. That's what the letter said. He leaned forward slightly. That's true, he said. A pause. But it's not all of it. Something inside my chest tightened. Because I already knew this wasn't going to be small. This happened during a joint operation, he continued. Multiple units, confusion on the ground. Communications were compromised. Images flickered at the edges of my mind. Disjointed. Blurred. Command was fragmented, he said. No clear chain of authority in that moment. I swallowed. Yes, I said slowly. I remember that. Do you remember the convoy, he asked? The word hit something deep. Convoy. A flicker of memory sharpened. Vehicles. Dust. Movement. Yes, I whispered. That convoy wasn't just transporting personnel, he said. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He exchanged a glance with the man to his left, then looked back at me. It was carrying classified equipment, he said. I blinked. That wasn't in any report. No, he said. It wasn't. A chill moved through me. Why not? Because it wasn't supposed to be there, he replied. Silence, heavy, sharp. What happened that night, he continued, wasn't just a tactical situation. I felt my pulse quicken. It was a failure. The word landed harder than anything else. Failure. Whose failure? I asked. His jaw tightened slightly. Command, he said, higher than anything you were ever told. I leaned back slowly, trying to process, trying to align this with what I thought I knew. You stepped in, he said, when everything broke down. I was just doing my job, I said automatically. He shook his head. No, ma'am, he said firmly. You weren't. That made me pause. Most people froze, he continued, or waited for orders that weren't coming. A memory surfaced. Voices, confusion, static over radios. Yes, I murmured. But you didn't wait, he said. Another memory. A decision. Sharp. Immediate. Because waiting would have cost lives. I said quietly. Yes, he said. His voice softened slightly. But that's not the part they left out. I looked at him, then at the others. What part? I asked. He hesitated, not because he didn't want to say it, but because he knew what it would mean once he did.
You disobeyed a direct order,
he said. The room went still. I stared at him. No, I said instinctively. That's not. It is, he said gently. My mind pushed back, hard, because that didn't fit. That wasn't who I had been. I followed protocol. I insisted. You followed your judgment, he corrected. The difference hit like a crack in glass. Command had issued a hold position order, he said. They believed moving the convoy would expose it to greater risk. My breath caught, because something about that sounded familiar. But you assessed the situation differently, he continued. Images sharpened now. Smoke, a narrowing route. The sense that time was collapsing in on itself. They didn't have the full picture, I said slowly. No, he agreed. They didn't. And I did, I whispered. You did, he confirmed. A silence stretched between us, heavy with realization. I moved the convoy, I said. It wasn't a question. It was memory returning. Yes. Without authorization. Yes. And if I had been wrong, I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. We wouldn't be here, he said quietly. The weight of that settled deep inside me. Not pride, not relief, responsibility. But you weren't wrong, he added. I closed my eyes briefly. No, I said. You saved us, he said simply. The words landed differently this time, because now I understood what they actually meant. Not just coordination, not just assistance. I had taken control. I had overridden command. I had made a decision that could have ended everything, and it hadn't. Why wasn't that in the report? I asked, opening my eyes. He gave a small, humorless smile. Because officially it couldn't be. I frowned. If it came out that command failed, he explained, and that a civilian contractor had to step in and override orders, it would have caused a scandal, I said. Yes, and careers would have ended. Yes, the room fell quiet again. So they changed the story, I said. They simplified it, he corrected. I let out a soft, breathless laugh. Simplified? I repeated. That word felt almost absurd now. They gave you recognition, he said. But not the full truth. Recognition without risk, I said. He nodded. Exactly. I looked down at my hands, at the small, almost invisible tremor in them. For years, I had thought I walked away because it didn't matter, because it wasn't worth holding on to. But now I saw something else. I had walked away from something I didn't fully understand, from a version of myself that had been edited, reduced, contained. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Because you deserve to know who you really were that night, he said. And who I really am? I asked. He held my gaze. Yes. A long silence followed, not uncomfortable, but necessary. You didn't just save lives, he continued. You took responsibility when no one else would. I swallowed. And you carried that alone, he added. That part hit the deepest. Because it was true. Even without remembering the details, I had carried something heavy, something unresolved, for years. You came to my house, I said slowly. You told me I saved your squad. Yes. But you didn't tell me this. He nodded. I wanted to, he said. But I wasn't sure how. And now, Now you're stepping back into that world, he said. And I didn't want you to walk into that room without knowing the truth. The truth, not the version they would present, not the polished narrative, the real one. What happens at the ceremony? I asked. He exchanged another glance with the others. They'll honor you, he said, for your decisive support and leadership under pressure. Support, leadership, words that danced around the reality. They won't mention the disobedience, I said. No, they won't mention the failure. No, they won't mention what was really at stake. No. I nodded slowly, because now I understood what tomorrow would be. Not just recognition, but a choice. A choice about which version of the truth I was willing to stand in. Why didn't you let it stay buried? I asked quietly. Daniel's expression shifted. Softer, more personal. Because it didn't feel right, he said. Watching you be honored, without knowing what you actually did. A long pause. And because, he added, you gave us the truth that night, even when it was hard. I felt something tighten in my chest. Emotion. Deep. Unexpected. I figured you deserved the same, he said. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, clear. Like something had finally been uncovered, and now it couldn't be unseen. I looked at him, at all of them, then back at my hands, at the life I had been living, the version of myself I had accepted. Quiet, small, safe. And I realized something that changed every young thing. That woman wasn't the truth. She was just the version that remained after everything else had been taken away. Tomorrow I would walk into that room. But now, I wouldn't just be receiving recognition. I would be standing with the full weight of what I had done. And for the first time, I had to ask myself something I had avoided for years. When they tell my story, will I let them tell it their way or mine? I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, not because I was uncertain, but because my mind refused to be quiet. Every word Daniel had said kept circling back over and over again like something trying to settle into place. You disobeyed a direct order. You took control. You saved us. For years, I had lived with a quiet sense that something about my past didn't fully belong to me. Now I understood why. It had been reshaped, softened, trimmed down into something easier to accept, easier to forget. But the truth was not soft. It was sharp, and it demanded to be acknowledged. I sat by the window of my hotel room long after the city lights had dimmed. Washington, D.C. looked different at night, quieter, more honest. Without the noise, the movement, the polished surfaces. Just like the truth Daniel had given me, raw, unfiltered. I thought about tomorrow, about the ceremony, about standing in a room filled with people who would speak about what I did, without truly saying it. And for the first time, I realized something that unsettled me. I wasn't sure I could stand there and stay silent. Not anymore. Morning came slowly, the kind of morning where everything feels heavier, more deliberate. I dressed carefully, not for anyone else, not for appearances, but because I understood something now. This wasn't just an event, it was a moment where I would either accept the version of myself they had written or reclaim the one they had hidden. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw Daniel waiting near the elevator. He stood straighter when he saw me, but his expression remained calm. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "Good morning," I replied. We walked to the elevator together. Neither of us spoke at first. There was no need. We both knew what today was. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" he asked quietly. I gave a faint smile. "Not really." He nodded. "Yeah, I figured." The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. As it descended, I watched the numbers change, each floor bringing me closer to something I couldn't undo. "Are you nervous?" he asked. I thought about it, then shook my head. "No," I said, "not nervous." He glanced at me. "What then?" I met his eyes briefly. "Clear," I said. That seemed to surprise him, but then he smiled. "Good," he said. We arrived at the lobby. More uniforms, more officials, more people who carried themselves with quiet authority. But this time, I didn't feel out of place. Not like I thought I would. If anything, I felt like I had finally stepped into the room I was meant to be in. A black car waited outside to take us to the ceremony. As we drove through the city, I watched the buildings pass by. Monuments, history, stories that had been told in full, and others that had been rewritten. "Do you know who will be there?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "Senior officers," he said. "Some representatives from the Department of Defense. A few people from your old contracting agency." I felt a small shift in my chest at that last part. "My old agency," I repeated. "Yes," I turned my gaze back to the window. "That should be interesting," I said. He didn't respond, but I could feel it. He understood what I meant. When we arrived, the building was already busy. Security, staff, attendees moving with purpose. Everything organized, controlled, polished. Exactly the kind of environment where the truth could be managed. We were escorted inside. The ceremony hall was larger than I expected. Rows of chairs, a stage at the front, podium, flags. Everything carefully arranged to convey honor, respect, recognition. I paused just inside the entrance, taking it all in. And for a moment, I felt that old instinct rise up. The one that told me to stay small, to stay quiet, to let others define the moment. But then I remembered. You didn't wait. You didn't stay silent. You acted. That woman, the one from that night, she was still here. I just had to let her stand. "Ms. Collins." I turned. A man in a formal suit approached me, his expression professional, but warm. "I am Robert Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "From the Department of Defense." I shook his hand. "Barbara Collins," I said. "It's an honor to finally meet you," he said. Finally, that word stood out. "Thank you," I replied. "We've prepared a brief program," he continued. "There will be a few remarks followed by the presentation." I nodded. "That sounds appropriate." He smiled slightly. "Of course." There was something in his tone, polished, careful, like every word had been chosen in advance. "You'll be seated in the front row," he added. "All right." He gestured toward the seating area, and Daniel stepped slightly closer beside me. We walked forward together. As I sat down, I became aware of the eyes, people looking, observing, assessing, some with curiosity, some with recognition, and some with something else, something harder to define. The kind of look that comes from knowing more than they're willing to say. I folded my hands in my lap. Calm, steady, present. The ceremony began shortly after. A speaker stepped onto the stage. Introductions, formalities, the kind of language that fills space without revealing too much. Then they began to speak about me. Barbara Collins, the speaker said, demonstrated exceptional composure and leadership during a critical operation overseas. I listened, every word, carefully. She provided decisive support under extreme pressure, contributing directly to the successful evacuation of personnel. Support. There it was again, soft, safe, incomplete. She acted with courage and clarity in a moment when it mattered most. Closer. But still, not the whole truth. I felt my hands tighten slightly in my lap, not out of anger, but awareness. This was the story they had chosen, the version that protected everyone, the version that kept things clean. Today, the speaker continued, we honor her for her service and her unwavering commitment to the safety of others. Applause filled the room. Polite, respectful, expected. And then, today, the speaker continued. We honor her for her service and her unwavering commitment to the safety of others. Applause filled the room. Polite, respectful, expected. And then, Ms. Collins, please join us on stage. The moment had arrived. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate, measured, not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what this moment carried. I walked toward the stage, step by step, feeling every eye on me, feeling every version of my past walking with me. The woman who had been overlooked, the woman who had stayed silent, and the woman who had taken control when everything fell apart. I stepped onto the stage. The lights were brighter up there, warmer, but they didn't blind me. They revealed. The official handed me a small velvet box. Inside, a medal. Simple, elegant, symbolic. For your service, he said. I took it. Thank you, I replied. Then he gestured toward the microphone. If you'd like to say a few words. There it was. The choice. The moment where everything could remain as it was, or change. I stepped forward. The room fell quiet, waiting, expecting something polite, something grateful, something. If you'd like to say a few words. There it was. The choice. The moment where everything could remain as it was, or change. I stepped forward. The room fell quiet, waiting, expecting something polite, something grateful, something safe. I looked out at the audience, at the rows of faces, at the men who knew, at the ones who didn't, at the system that had rewritten my story. And I realized something with absolute clarity. I wasn't afraid of the truth. I never had been. I took a slow breath, then leaned slightly toward the microphone. My name is Barbara Collins, I began. My voice was steady, clear, and for the first time in years, entirely my own. I appreciate the recognition, I said. A pause. But there's something important missing from the story you've been told. The room shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Silence deepened. I could feel it, the tension, the uncertainty, the realization that this wasn't going to follow the script. I glanced briefly toward Daniel. He didn't move, but his eyes, they held something steady, support, permission. I looked back at the audience and made my choice. I didn't just provide support that night, I said. The words echoed slightly in the room. Firm, unavoidable. I disobeyed a direct order. A ripple moved through the crowd. Shock, confusion, discomfort. exactly as expected. But I didn't stop, because I couldn't, not anymore. The silence after I said it was immediate, sharp, unavoidable. It didn't ripple this time. It stopped. Like the entire room had stopped. Like the entire room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. I disobeyed a direct order. The words hung in the air heavier than anything that had been said before. I could see it in their faces. Confusion, shock, discomfort, and in some of them tively forgotten how to breathe. I disobeyed a direct order. The words hung in the air heavier than anything that had been said before. I could see it in their faces. Confusion, shock, discomfort, and in some of them, recognition. The kind of recognition that doesn't come from hearing something new, but from hearing something that was always known, finally spoken aloud. The man who had introduced me, Robert Hayes, shifted slightly beside me. His smile was gone now, replaced by something tighter, controlled. "Ms. Collins," he said quietly, stepping a fraction closer to the microphone. "Perhaps we should." "No," I said gently but firmly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, because this wasn't confrontation. This was clarity. "I think it's important," I continued, turning slightly back toward the audience, "that we understand what actually happened that night." A murmur moved through the room. Not loud, but present, unsettled. I let it settle before continuing. "There was confusion," I said. "Communication failures, orders that didn't reflect what was happening on the ground." I paused, letting the truth take shape in its simplest form. And in that moment, I made a decision. I could feel my heartbeat now. Not racing, but steady, grounded. "I chose to move a convoy against direct instruction," I said. A sharper reaction this time, a shift in posture, heads turning, whispers beginning, because this wasn't the story they had prepared. "If I had been wrong," I continued, "we wouldn't be standing here today." That quieted them again, because the weight of that truth didn't need explanation. It spoke for itself. I glanced briefly at the men seated a few rows back. Daniel, the others. They didn't move, but their presence, it held, supportive, unwavering. But I wasn't wrong, I said, not proudly, not defensively, just fact. I made that decision because I could see something others couldn't in that moment. I looked back at the audience, at least not yet. A pause, then, and that decision saved lives. No embellishment, no dramatics, just truth. I could see the shift now, not just discomfort, something deeper. Recalibration. Because now they weren't just hearing about a commendation. They were being asked to reconsider the entire foundation of it. Robert Hayes stepped closer again, more carefully this time. "Barbara," he said quietly, his voice no longer purely formal. "We appreciate your honesty, but this is exactly the setting," I said. I turned slightly toward him, but not away from the microphone, because this wasn't private. It wasn't meant to be. "If we're going to honor actions," I continued, "we should honor them fully." His jaw tightened slightly. "This event is meant to recognize your service," he said. "It is," I agreed, "and service includes responsibility." Another pause, longer this time, because now the tension wasn't just in the audience. It was on the stage, shared, visible. "Responsibility means acknowledging what actually happened," I said. I turned back to the room. "To the people who were there," I added. My eyes moved across the faces again. And this time, I saw it. More clearly. Not just discomfort, respect. The kind that comes when someone says something difficult and doesn't step back from it. "I'm grateful for this recognition," I said, and I meant it. I truly am. I glanced down at the medal in my hand, then back up. But I didn't come here to accept a version of my story that leaves out the hardest part. That line, that one shifted everything, because it wasn't rejection. It was definition, a boundary, a choice. The room was completely silent now, not tense, not chaotic, just still, listening. I stepped back slightly from the microphone, not because I was done, but because I wanted them to understand something before I continued. "I didn't disobey that order because I thought I knew better," I said. I looked at my hands briefly, then back up. "I did it because I understood what would happen if I didn't." A breath, slow, steady. And I was willing to take responsibility for that outcome. That word again, responsibility, not heroism, not bravery. Responsibility. I let that sit, because it mattered, because it reframed everything. "I don't expect everyone to agree with that decision," I continued, "and I don't expect it to be comfortable." A faint, almost ironic smile touched my lips. It wasn't comfortable then either. A few quiet breaths in the room. People shifting, not away, but into the moment. "But if we're going to talk about courage," I said, "we should be honest about what it actually looks like." I leaned slightly closer to the microphone again. "It doesn't always follow orders." That landed, firm, clear, and it doesn't always fit into a clean report. I straightened. "And sometimes it comes with consequences that aren't easy to explain." A long pause followed, not forced, not dramatic, just necessary. Then I took a small step back. "That's all I wanted to say." I finished. I stepped away from the microphone, and for a moment, nothing happened. No applause, no reaction, just silence. And then, one person stood, slowly, deliberately. Daniel. He didn't clap right away. He just stood, straight, steady. And that was enough, because then another stood, and another, until the room began to rise, not quickly, not out of obligation, but with a kind of quiet recognition, a different kind of respect, the kind that isn't given because of a title or an award, but because someone told the truth when it would have been easier not to. The applause came after that, stronger, deeper, less polished, more real. I stood there, holding the medal in my hand, and for the first time since this began, I felt something settle inside me. Not pride, not validation, something simpler. Peace. Because I hadn't accepted their version, and I hadn't rejected it either. I had completed it. Robert Hayes approached me again. But this time, he didn't try to redirect. He didn't try to control. He simply nodded. Once. A small gesture, but meaningful. "Thank you," he said quietly. I met his eyes and nodded back. "Thank you," I replied. Because now, this moment, it finally belonged to me. The applause didn't fade quickly. It lingered. Not loud, not chaotic, but steady, deliberate, different from the polite applause earlier. This one meant something. I stood there still holding the medal, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Not as an award, but as a symbol that had finally been matched with the truth. When the applause eventually softened, I stepped down from the stage. The moment my feet touched the floor again, the atmosphere shifted. People weren't just watching me now. They were approaching, slowly at first, carefully, as if they weren't entirely sure what they were allowed to say. The first person to reach me was an older man in uniform, late 60s, maybe older. His posture was rigid, but his eyes carried something far more complicated. "Ms. Collins?" he said. "Barbara is fine," I replied. He nodded once. "Barbara," he corrected. There was a pause. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I was part of the review panel years ago," he said. That caught my attention. "The review panel," I repeated. He nodded. "Yes." A quiet beat passed between us. "Then you already knew," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. "We knew enough," he replied. That answer, it wasn't satisfying, but it was honest. "Not enough to say it out loud," I said. His jaw tightened slightly. "No," he admitted. "And why not?" I asked. Not angrily, just directly. He exhaled slowly. "Because saying it out loud would have forced accountability," he said. And at the time, that wasn't something the system was prepared to face. There it was. Not incompetence, not ignorance, choice. Deliberate. Calculated. And for a moment, I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger. Not even resentment. Just a deep, quiet recognition of how many years had been shaped by that decision. "I lived with that silence," I said. "I know," he replied, and for the first time, he looked at me not as a subject of a report, but as a person. "I'm sorry," he added. Simple words, but not easy ones. I studied his face for a moment, looking for something. Excuse, deflection, but there wasn't any. Just acceptance. I nodded once. "Thank you," I said, not because it erased anything, but because it mattered that it was said. He gave a small nod in return, then stepped aside. The next person approached before I could take a breath. A woman this time, mid-40s, sharp eyes, composed demeanor. "I'm Karen Mitchell," she said, offering her hand. "Legal advisor for the department." I shook her hand. "Barbara." She didn't waste time. "What you said up there," she began, "changes things?" I raised an eyebrow slightly. "How so?" She glanced briefly toward the stage, then back at me. "There are records," she said. "Reports that were adjusted." I let out a quiet breath. I assumed as much. "But now," she continued, "there's a public statement contradicting that version." I understood immediately. "And that creates a problem," I said. She gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "It creates an opportunity," she corrected. That surprised me. "An opportunity to correct the record," she said. "Officially." I looked at her carefully. "And what would that involve?" "An internal review," she replied. "Potentially a formal amendment to the documentation." Documentation. Records. Paper. Things that had defined my experience without ever truly reflecting it. And the consequences, I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Some people won't be comfortable," she said. "Some decisions may be revisited." That was a careful way of saying it. Revisited. Re-examined. Held accountable. I glanced across the room again. At the faces. At the system that had once chosen silence. "And you think that's going to happen now?" I asked. She met my gaze steadily. "I think it already started the moment you spoke," she said. There was something in her tone. Not optimism, not even confidence, just realism. The kind that acknowledges change isn't guaranteed, but it's possible. And that was enough. "I'll consider it," I said. She nodded. "That's all we can ask." Before she stepped away, she added one more thing. "And for what it's worth, you did the right thing, then and now." I watched her walk away, her words settling in slowly. Then and now. 2 different moments, 2 different kinds of courage. Both costly. "Ma'am?" I turned. Daniel was standing there again. But this time, he wasn't alone. 3 other men stood behind him. Different ages, different builds, but the same presence. Grounded, quiet, and unmistakably connected to that night. "This is Sergeant Lewis," Daniel said, gesturing to the man on his left. "Corporal Hayes and Specialist Grant." Each of them nodded in turn. "Ma'am," they said. I felt something tighten in my throat. Not from sadness, from recognition. These were the faces behind the story, the ones who had lived through it, the ones who hadn't just heard about what happened. They had been there. "It's good to meet you," I said. Sergeant Lewis stepped forward slightly. "We've been wanting to say that for a long time," he said. I gave a small, warm smile. "I'm glad we finally can." There was a pause. Not awkward, just full. "We heard what you said up there," Corporal Hayes added. I nodded. I meant every word. "We know," Specialist Grant said, quietly. And that meant more than any applause, more than any recognition, because they didn't need convincing. They had always known. "We just wanted to make sure you knew something too," Sergeant Lewis continued. I tilted my head slightly. "What's that?" He glanced briefly at the others, then back at me. "You didn't just save us," he said. "You changed how we think about leadership." That caught me off guard. "Leadership," I repeated. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Because that night, you didn't wait for permission. You saw what needed to be done, and you did it." I looked down for a moment, not out of modesty, but because I was trying to process something deeper. I wasn't thinking about leadership, I admitted. "I know," he said. "That's what made it real." I looked back up, and in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. What I did that night, it wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about being right. It was about responsibility. And that was something no report could ever fully capture. "Thank you," I said softly. Not as a formality, but because I meant it, because hearing it from them, from the people who had lived through that moment, it mattered more than anything else in this room. They didn't stay long. None of them did, because there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to explain, just a quiet understanding that had finally been spoken aloud. As the room slowly began to empty, I found myself standing near the edge of it, watching people leave, watching conversations unfold in hushed tones, watching something shift, not dramatically, but undeniably. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't standing outside my own story anymore. I was inside it, fully, honestly. And finally, on my own terms. By the time I stepped outside, the air felt different, cooler, quieter, real. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from emptiness, but from something settling. The doors behind me closed with a soft, heavy sound muting the voices inside. For a moment, I just stood there on the wide stone steps, breathing in the evening air. Washington, D.C. always had a way of feeling distant from everything, and yet at the center of it all. Tonight, it felt like both. Barbara. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Emily. Her voice hadn't changed, but something inside it had. I turned slowly. She stood a few steps behind me, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, not because it was cold, but because she didn't know what else to do with them. Behind her, Michael lingered near the doorway. Not close enough to interrupt. Not far enough to disappear. And for the first time in years, they didn't look confident. They didn't look certain. They looked unsure. "Can we talk?" Emily asked. The words were soft, careful, almost fragile. I studied her for a moment. The daughter who once spoke over me, dismissed me, reduced me to something small. And now, she was waiting, for permission. "For a minute," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." She nodded quickly, as if even that small opening mattered more than she expected. We moved a little farther down the steps away from the entrance, away from the people still filtering out. Michael followed slower. Hesitant, keeping a distance that felt appropriate. Emily exhaled long and shaky. "I didn't know," she said. The words came out quickly, like she'd been holding them in for too long. "I swear, Mom, I didn't know any of that." I didn't respond right away, because I believed her, but belief didn't erase anything. "You didn't ask," I said. Not harsh, not accusatory, just true. She flinched slightly. "I thought I knew," she admitted. "That's different," I replied. She swallowed, her eyes glistening now. "I didn't think I didn't understand what you went through." "No," I said quietly. "You didn't." Another pause, longer this time, because now we were standing in the space between truth and consequence. "I was wrong," she said finally. There it was, simple, direct, late, but real. "I know," I said. She blinked, caught off guard by how easily I said it. "I mean it," she insisted. She struggled for the right word. "I was arrogant. I thought everything you did was small, ordinary." I let out a slow breath. "That's what you were taught to see," I said. Her brow furrowed slightly. "Taught." I nodded. "Not just by me," I clarified. "By everything around you. By the way society measures worth. By the way stories get told and untold. By the silence. You saw what was visible," I continued, "and you assumed that was everything." She looked down, ashamed. "And it wasn't," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "It wasn't." Michael shifted slightly behind her, then stepped forward. "Barbara," he said. His voice was steadier than Emily, but not by much. "I owe you an apology, too." I looked at him, the man who had once stood beside my daughter and quietly agreed with everything she said about me. "I shouldn't have supported the way she spoke to you," he continued. "I knew it wasn't right. I just didn't want to create conflict." I held his gaze, and instead, "You allowed it," I said. He nodded. Yes, no excuses, no deflection, just acknowledgement. That mattered, more than he probably realized. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he added. I just needed to say that. I studied both of them for a moment. Emily's red shoulders tight waiting. Michael calm on the surface, but clearly unsettled beneath it. They weren't the same people who had dismissed me months ago. But that didn't mean everything was fixed. Not even close. Forgiveness isn't a moment, I said. They both listened carefully. It's a process. I continued, and it doesn't start with words. Emily nodded quickly. I understand. Do you? I asked softly. She hesitated. Then, I want to. she said. That was honest. And honesty? It was a start. I shifted my weight slightly, looking out over the city for a moment before turning back to them. You don't rebuild something by saying you're sorry once, I said. You rebuild it by showing consistently that you understand what was broken. Emily wiped at her eyes. I will, she said. I promise. Promises. I had heard those before, but something about this moment felt different. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Less certainty. More humility. We'll see, I replied. Not dismissive, not accepting, just open, and for now. That was enough. Another silence settled between us. But it wasn't heavy. It wasn't painful. It was transitional. Like standing at the edge of something new without knowing exactly what it would become. I'm proud of you, Emily said suddenly. The words caught me off guard. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I realized something. She had never said that before. Not once. I held her gaze. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Because even though it came late, it mattered. Michael cleared his throat slightly. What you did in there, he added, that took courage. I shook my head gently. No, I said. They both looked confused. It took honesty, I clarified. And there's a difference. Emily tilted her head slightly. What's the difference? I thought about it for a moment. Courage is doing something difficult, I said. Honesty is doing something necessary, even when it costs you. That seemed to land, because neither of them responded right away. They were thinking, really thinking, and that was new. I'm glad you came tonight, I added after a moment. Emily blinked. You are? I nodded. Yes, even after everything. Yes, she let out a shaky breath. Why, I gave a small, quiet smile. Because now you've seen something you can't unsee. Understanding, truth, perspective. And once those things settle in, they change you, whether you want them to or not. Emily nodded slowly. I think they already have, she said. I believed her. But again, belief wasn't the same as resolution. Go home, I said gently. Give it time. She nodded again, stepping back slightly. Will I see you soon? She asked. I paused, considering. Maybe I said, not a promise, but not a rejection either. Just possibility. And sometimes that's where healing begins. They didn't push for more. They didn't try to extend the moment. They simply nodded quietly and turned to leave. I watched them go. Not with resentment, not with relief, but with a kind of cautious acceptance. Because for the first time, they weren't walking away from me. They were walking away with something they hadn't had before. Understanding, and that was a beginning, not the end. As the city lights flickered on around me, I finally turned and walked down the steps alone. But this time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like something else, something steady, something earned, something that after all these years finally felt like peace. A week later, I was back home, not in Washington, not in a room full of uniforms, officials, or applause. Just home, my small, quiet house in Arlington, Virginia. The same place I had sat alone so many nights, wondering if any of it had ever mattered. Now, everything felt different. Not louder, not bigger, just clearer. I stood in my kitchen that morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunlight stretch slowly across the counter. The radio played softly in the background, some local news station talking about things that used to feel important. traffic, politics, weather. But today they felt distant because something inside me had shifted. Not because of the ceremony, not because of the medal, but because for the first time in years, the truth had been spoken out loud and heard. The knock at the door came just after 10. Not urgent, not hesitant, just steady. I set my mug down and walked over, already having a sense of who it might be. When I opened the door, Emily stood there, alone. No Michael this time. No distance. No hesitation. Just her. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. I stepped aside. "Come in." She walked in slowly, looking around as if she hadn't really seen the place before. Which in a way, she hadn't, because before she had only seen it as something small. Now she was seeing it for what it actually was. A life, built quietly, carefully, with more strength than she had ever understood. "It's nice," she said almost to herself. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" She nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." We moved into the kitchen together, and for a moment, it felt like stepping into a memory. Only, this version was softer, less tense, less guarded. I poured her a cup and slid it across the counter. She wrapped her hands around it like she needed something to hold on to. "I've been thinking a lot," she said after a moment. "I figured you might," I replied. She gave a small, nervous smile. "I don't think I've ever thought this much in my life." That almost made me smile. Almost. "I talked to Michael," she continued. We had a long conversation after we left that night." I leaned lightly against the counter, listening. "About you?" she added. "And?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. We realized something she said. I didn't interrupt. "We've been measuring people the wrong way," she said. That caught my attention. "How so?" She looked at me directly. "We've been measuring worth by visibility," she said. "By money. By status. By what people can show." I nodded slightly. "And what changed?" She swallowed. "You did," she said. Simple, but heavy. Because that realization didn't come easily. "And what are you measuring now?" I asked. She hesitated. "Impact," she said finally. "Character. What someone does when no one's watching." I held her gaze. That answer, it meant something. Because it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It was earned. "That's a better way to see things," I said quietly. She nodded, her eyes filling again. I wish I had seen it sooner. I stepped closer, resting my hand lightly on the counter between us. "You're seeing it now," I said. "That's what matters." She let out a small, shaky breath. "I don't expect things to go back to normal," she added quickly. "They won't," I said. Not unkindly, just truthfully. She nodded. "I know." Another pause. But this one, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. "I want to do better," she said. I studied her for a moment, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see the daughter who had dismissed me. I saw someone who was trying, really trying. "That's all anyone can ask," I said. She smiled faintly. Relief, not because she was forgiven, but because she wasn't shut out. And sometimes, that's the first step. We sat there for a while longer, talking about small things. Work, life. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy, just connection. and it felt new, fragile, but real. Later that afternoon, after Emily left, I found myself sitting in the living room, looking at the small wooden box on the coffee table. Inside it, the medal. I hadn't hung it up, hadn't displayed it, because that wasn't what it was for. I opened the box slowly, letting the light catch the surface of it. For years, I had thought recognition would change something, fix something, fill something. But now I understood. It wasn't the medal that mattered. It was the truth behind it, the acknowledgement, the voices that had finally spoken. Daniel, his squad, even the system that had once chosen silence, and my family, learning, changing, slowly, but genuinely. I closed the box gently and leaned back in my chair. For so long, I had carried the weight of being unseen, of being dismissed, of being reduced to something smaller than I knew I was. And for a while, that had almost convinced me it was true. But it wasn't. It never was. Because worth isn't something given by others. It's something lived, proven, quietly, consistently, even when no one notices, even when no one understands. And sometimes, especially then, that night as I stood by the window watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel the need to prove anything anymore. Not to my family, not to the system, not to anyone, because I already knew who I was. And now, so did they. The next chapter of my life wouldn't be about fighting to be seen. It would be about living fully in the truth that I already had been, all along, and that was more powerful than any recognition could ever be. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people closest to us. From being dismissed, misunderstood, undervalued, and over time, those wounds can make you question your own worth. But this story is a reminder of something powerful. Your value does not depend on who sees it. Your strength does not require recognition. And your impact is not measured by applause. Barbara Collins didn't act because she wanted credit. She acted because it was right. And even when the world stayed silent, the truth never changed. Eventually, it surfaced. And when it did, it didn't just change how others saw her. It changed how she saw herself and how her family saw the world. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter, remember this: silence does not erase truth, and time does not diminish what you've done. The right people will see it. Maybe later than you hoped, but when they do, it will mean something. And more importantly, you will already know your worth. If this story touched you, I'd really love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? What time is it where you are right now? Have you ever felt overlooked or underestimated by your own family? Share your story in the comments. You're not alone. And if you believe in stories about strength, truth, and quiet resilience, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more stories like this waiting for you. CTA. Sometimes the most painful place to feel invisible is not in the world, but in your own family. When the people who are supposed to know you best fail to see your worth, it can slowly erode your confidence, making you question whether you were ever enough. But the truth is this: your value has never depended on their recognition. It has always been there in the quiet choices you make, in the sacrifices no one applauds, and in the strength you carry even when no one notices. Barbara's story reminds us that real impact is often invisible at first. The world may overlook it. People may misunderstand it. Even those closest to you may dismiss it. But that does not make it small. It simply means it hasn't been revealed yet. And when truth finally rises, because it always does, it doesn't just change how others see you. It changes how you see yourself. And maybe that's the real victory. Not the apology, not the recognition, not even the justice, but the moment you no longer need any of it to know who you are. If you've ever felt underestimated, unheard, or taken for granted, please remember this: you are not invisible. Your story matters. Your strength matters. And one day, whether others acknowledge it or not, it will stand on its own. If this message touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our true worth, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for more.